The guys that I wanted to talk about specifically are Chael Sonnen and Michael Chandler, okay? So if the crux of your argument is that the UFC has taken away the ability for anyone to go make money in a competitive organization, okay? And then you have two people who fought for both Bellator and UFC in elite positions, making lots of money from both. One of them started at UFC and went over to Bellator, and one of them started at Bellator and went over to UFC, and the judge deems it not relevant what those guys' testimony is in defense of the UFC. That's complete bull. All right, so I'm glad that I got a break from this Ryan Garcia nonsense where I'm just kind of making, I don't even know what I'm doing. But now we get to talk actual serious business, because I got a story about Conor McGregor and I got a story about the civil lawsuit. Both are huge stories as it relates to the business of mixed martial arts, combat sports in general, and Conor McGregor. So Conor answered some questions about what he has coming next, and in answering those, he gave it all away. Exactly what is going on. Exactly. I'm telling you exactly what is going on, and I'm going to tell you there. And you also had a catastrophic ruling against the UFC in the civil lawsuit. And the civil lawsuit is directly related to their ability to negotiate with Conor McGregor, and I'm going to put it all together in this video. So we're going to go Conor McGregor first, and then we're going to go the civil lawsuit second. So that's what we're going to do. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and like the video, and then tell me what you think in the comments, and let's do this thing. So now let's talk about Conor McGregor and his proposed schedule for when he's going to fight. And I feel for this guy, dude. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I do. I feel for Conor, man, because we know that it's not him that is keeping him from fighting now. I mean, that I can prove to you from previous stuff that happened, a few years ago. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But look at, so what we're talking about here is Conor answered this, answered this way. He also put out a proposed schedule. He wants to fight in June against Chandler, September against Nate Diaz, and then at the end of the year against Manny Pacquiao. Like, he wants to fight. He's not saying that not wanting to fight. His problem is not about a desire to fight. His problem is that he is under contract with the UFC, and they are trying to negotiate a new deal for him because he has 2 fights left on his deal. Remember when I did a video a couple months ago when there was that huge break, and I was like, blockbuster UFC Conor McGregor contract news. And I was like, he confirmed now for sure only has 2 fights left on his deal. And I had some people in the comments like, how is that a blockbuster? And I'm like, well, finding out that Conor's contractual situation with the UFC tells us that there is a massive level of negotiation that needs to happen before Conor gets back in the cave. That is a blockbuster, because look, like in Conor's scenario right here, if they just gave him those 2 fights, like in Conor's, I don't think that it's coincidence that Conor is saying this one, boxing. Okay? Like, keep that in mind. Conor McGregor's proposed schedule says MMA, boxing. You think that's a coincidence that he has 2 fights left on his deal, and then the next one that he does is Manny Pacquiao? Do you really believe that? Conor wants out of his UFC contract, it sounds like, or wants a new contract with UFC where they will co-promote a Manny Pacquiao fight, which is a massive amount of like details that need to get worked out. And like, he's in a tough spot. He's so valuable. He is so valuable that it's got to be nearly impossible for the UFC to even think. And listen, the UFC has, as we've either, I don't know if I'm going to put this before or after, but we're either just getting done talking about it, or more likely the next story we're going to talk about is this class action lawsuit. Like, do you understand what kind of financial hit it'll be to the UFC if they end up having to pay out $800 million to the fighters? 800, you know what I mean? Like, they are asking for between, I believe it's 900 million and 1.6 billion, right? So if the UFC negotiates a settlement and they agree, and let's say it ends up let's say it's 750 million. Do you have any idea what kind of financial hit that is? Do you think that like getting Conor a new historically enormous contract could potentially be impacted by a near $1 billion bill that the UFC is handed? Like the culmination of things here, is not good for Conor to get a quick resolution. And the guy wants to fight, dude. So he said still hoping for a June 29th. Lack of action on it, however, is causing a lack of enthusiasm, which means the UFC is not getting back to them. That's what that means. It means that they have proposed something. UFC's not responding to them. Okay. I need a decision soon. I'm the most tested athlete under this new regime. It says I'm most yet no date to fight. The game is a bit lackluster also at present, which isn't helping. I hope those next 2 cards pop and I get a date. Eliminate distractions and begin real work towards it. You know, like if he was asking for 5, 10, 20, you know, maybe even like 10, 15 million a fight, he'd be fighting, you know, as long as he would lock himself in. But right now, for the UFC's business, all they want is Conor to not be able to fight anywhere else. You know, I think honest to God, if Conor was just like, dude, I'll just fight under my current contract, they won't give him a fight. They will only give him a fight if he locks himself in. But the number it would take for him to lock himself in is probably so high that they can't even do that. Like Conor has become so valuable that he is stuck. He's stuck. And man, if I was him, I would be like, look, dude, you want me to sign a contract that's locking me in? I need a guarantee that I am offered this many fights per year and they have to be in this weight class. You know what I mean? Like this is just... So there's never been an official reason given for Conor's delayed return to the cage. Okay, I just told you. I just gave it to you. Conor doesn't, yeah, Dana says Conor doesn't need the money. So when you don't need the money, it's not easy. I mean, Khabib doesn't need the money. Khabib retired. Right. Okay, but Conor wants to fight. And the problem is that he's worth too much, you know? And he's A, worth too much, and B, they cannot let him be a free agent, you know? And so Conor, again, I just want to keep coming back to this word. The lack of action on it, however, is now causing lack of enthusiasm. I'm telling you unequivocally, that is meaning that the UFC is not getting back to them. You know, like they've proposed, and then they're not even, like the UFC is not even sending back any counter offers, nothing. Like they're just not responding. Okay, so then on this one, he says, on a flight, about to do a dint of bottle. Okay, so Conor, want to see you in Diaz trilogy. Make it happen. He said, I wish for this on Mexican Independence Day in the Sphere. Chandler in June, Diaz September. I have let this be known. Right? And then this one. And then they said, what about the potential Manny bout? Saudis are doing well. It's still there. Could be December. The Saudis are game changers in the market 100%. Okay? This tells you every single thing that you want to know. Conor is being Conor has laid this out exactly. This is exactly what's going on. Like what I just said earlier, this is exactly what's going on. Exactly. I'm telling you that I hadn't even read that part, but what I said is exactly what's going on. 2 fights left on his deal. He wants to do that and that, you know, Diaz and Chandler, and then he wants to be able to go in December and fight for the Saudis. And he said the Saudis are game changers in the market 100% because now his value is so high because the Saudis will pay him $150 million to do that fight, or 100, whatever. They'll pay him so much money. And so the UFC is now having to negotiate against the Saudis. It's the first time that the Saudis, well, I guess the second time with Francis, but now for real. Like, this is a huge game changer for Conor and for people like Conor, where the Saudis are like, hey, man, you get out of your contract and I'll pay you what you would have made in 5 fights in 1 fight. You know what I mean? 5-1. And the UFC is going to continue to have to deal with this, but the longer they can delay it, the better for them, you know, because they need to get this civil deal done with before they can even really know where they're at. You know, they're not the Saudis. They don't have $1 trillion to play around, or, you know, who knows how much. So this is very, very notable, very interesting. And I now am realizing I'm definitely going to do the lawsuit second. So now let's get into that part of the story because there's a huge story there also. All right, so shifting gears from this Ryan Garcia meltdown story, this is a really serious story about the antitrust class action lawsuit against the UFC. And I'm going to be honest, as I look through this story right here, which is the judge disqualified 13 witnesses from testifying on the behalf of the UFC, this is crazy to me. And I'm talking crazy. I cannot understand how a court could possibly justify disqualifying a few of these guys. So there's a lot of guys on here, you know, and I'll go through them in detail. You have some managers, you got some UFC current fighters, you have some former fighters, you have some commentators. But there are 2 names in particular that got disqualified that is completely indefensible. You cannot disqualify those guys given the reason that this lawsuit is happening without telling me that there is a problem with this court. It makes no sense. Absolutely none to disqualify these guys. So this is not good for the UFC. Like, this is actually really not good for the UFC. The fact that these guys got disqualified, I don't know what it does to appeal. It sounds like there's a possibility the UFC is going to settle with these guys before. And candidly, given what this means, I do not think that is a bad idea, because it doesn't sound like the judge is on the side of the UFC here. So anyway, I want to read this article to you guys, and then I'm going to explain why this is so devastating to the UFC's case. But even more so, the original commentary I'm going to provide here is why this is a complete BS decision from the judge. And this has nothing to do with, I'm not on a side here, but like, when I explain this, you'll have to agree that if this is the merit of the plaintiff's case, how could you possibly disqualify these two guys defending the UFC? So that is what we're going to do. If you have not subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and do that. Ring the bell so that you know next time I upload another funny video about a meltdown 25-year-old millionaire boxer or something really serious like this happening. But yeah, go ahead and like the video. If you like it. I mean, if you hate the UFC, then I would imagine you like this video. And if you like the fact that I'm going to provide some good commentary on why this decision's BS, then you can also like the video. But tell me what you guys think in the comments. So first, let me just read through this really quick. With the UFC's antitrust trial date quickly approaching April 15th, so it's like in 5 weeks, Judge Richard Bauer ruled on several motions in the case in the Nevada courtroom Monday, including 13 witnesses that were potentially being called to testify on behalf of the promotion. The fighters on the list included UFC Hall of Famer Michael Bisping, Donald Cerrone, Chael Sonnen, Miesha Tate, Michael Chandler, as well as prominent managers such as Ali Abdelaziz, Dan Lambert from American Top Team, Iridium Sports Agency, Jason House. It turns out none of them will be allowed to testify at the trial after Judge Bauer granted the plaintiff's motion to exclude the 13 named witnesses, which included the fighters, managers, and even current UFC matchmaker Mick Maynard. Mick Maynard can't testify for the UFC? Paul Gift initially reported the news on Twitter. The plaintiff's attorneys had argued that the witness list was not disclosed ahead of time to allow for depositions to be taken long before trial began. Okay, so I actually, candidly, I can't say anything about that. I don't know when the witness list was provided. So here's the thing. If that's the reason they got disqualified, fine. Okay, because I don't know. If that is real, if the witness list was not provided and they weren't allowed to do depositions, and that is what it. Okay, then that might or might not be legit. I don't know enough about court procedures to have any opinion on whether or not that was a good or bad decision. But the part that I'm going to explain to you is why it is absurd to do the trial without letting these certain guys, specifically Chandler, Chael, and a couple other people, speak on behalf of the organization. But anyway, so despite objections from the UFC's legal team, ultimately he ruled that the 13 witnesses would not be allowed to testify at trial because they were not properly disclosed in time. Okay, so that is why he's saying that happened, which I don't know if the UFC's lawyers messed up or if they tried to do it on purpose and slip it by. I don't know. But they also acknowledge that the UFC and the plaintiffs remain in discussions about a possible resolution before going to trial. So these guys are going to get some money. They're going to get some money, it looks like. At the heart of the antitrust lawsuits, the fighters involved, now this is really important to the point that I'm going to make in a second. At the heart of the antitrust lawsuit, the fighters involved claimed that the UFC engaged in a scheme to acquire and maintain monopsony power in the market for elite professional MMA fighter services. They claim the UFC used 3 components to achieve this goal, including acquisitions, exclusive contracts, and coercion. The plaintiffs are seeking damages between $900 million and $1.6 billion. Meanwhile, the current UFC owners at TKO Group Holdings addressed the upcoming trial at the antitrust lawsuit they said, as we've always said, and this is our consistent message since we started talking about this case publicly, we believe strongly that the facts and the law are on our side, and we look forward to, in terms of timing, to making our argument to the jury at trial. But as is typical in a case like this, we've been engaged in private mediation simultaneously with our trial preparation. That's what we're prepared to comment on at this time. So that means we think that we think the facts are on our side, but we're probably going to make a settlement offer. Okay, so now I want to go back to this statement right here. Okay. So they said, scheme to acquire and maintain monopsony power in the market for elite professional MMA fighter services. And that includes acquisitions, exclusive contracts, and coercion. So before I actually say anything about this, I want to say this. This guy, what's his name, who just retired because he can't pay his bills and he doesn't make enough per fight to both pay his coaches, pay his taxes, and be able to even like feed his family. That has to change. Bottom line, that has to change. That cannot be the case anymore for a veteran fighter like that fights a couple times a year, who goes out there, who does his training camps, and like he can't even feed his family. That cannot. UFC is too big, too profitable for there to be anyone that is fighting at the UFC level that cannot even pay their bills. Like that just can't be the case anymore. The UFC is too valuable for that. They bring in too much money. That has to change. Bottom line. So I just want to make that perfectly clear. That is my opinion on fighter pay. I have not always had that opinion, but now I do. Like I didn't realize how broke these guys were. It's just not acceptable for professional athletes at this level in this type of promotion to be that broke, you know? So that being said, when it comes to this argument, okay, the reason why I keep coming back to Kung Lee is because he's like the key guy in this lawsuit. And Kung Lee made millions of dollars. Okay? It's like, okay, do you think that fighter pay needs to change? Yes. Do you think that this guy has a reasonable claim to be suing the UFC where he personally is going to get paid like $4 million or whatever he's going to get paid? Dude, no, that's bullshit. He got paid like $700,000 for one of those fights or something like that, like, or even more. Like when I read how much money Kung Lee was making per fight, I'm like, and this guy's suing the UFC? It's bullshit, dude. Nonetheless, okay, the guys that I wanted to talk about specifically are Chael Sonnen and Michael Chandler, okay? So if the crux of your argument is that the UFC has taken away the ability for anyone to go make money in a competitive organization, okay? And then you have two people who fought for both Bellator and UFC in elite positions, making lots of money from both. One of them started at UFC and went over to Bellator, and one of them started at Bellator and went over to UFC, and the judge deems it not relevant what those guys' testimony is in defense of the UFC. That's complete bullshit, obviously. Again, Chael starts at UFC, has a very successful career, then goes to Bellator. Michael Chandler has a very successful career at Bellator and then goes to UFC and is still actively fighting. You're not going to let them testify in defense of the UFC, given that your entire case is based on the fact that people can't go from organization to organization and get paid their worth? That makes no sense. That makes no sense. Now, again, in the actual case, the judge disqualified them because they're saying the UFC didn't disclose them in time. I have no opinion on that. I have no idea if it's true. But just as a fundamental fact, that's ludicrous that they would not be able to testify. Right? I mean, am I wrong about this? Now, at the same time, look, I'm not naive to the fact that you have to follow some kind of protocol, you know? It's like, okay, we've, delayed this case. The case is happening on April 15th, and then you come in April 11th, and you're like, hey, we got this guy. Of course, there has to be procedure that's followed. So I don't really know if this is a legit decision as it relates to when they disclose them or not. But you have to admit that that's crazy for them not to be able to have a word in this case. But I honestly do think that the larger case here has to do with the poor fighters, not with the big guys, the poor guys. So, listen, I don't know enough to have any kind of like well-formed thoughts about how to solve the problem or what to do or whatever, or who's getting screwed or how or whatever. But I do agree that, Dana being at the blackjack table and then handing $250,000 to the Nelk boys and all this stuff. And simultaneously you have guys who are retiring from, and they've had 10 fights in the UFC and they're like, I literally just can't do this anymore. They have to retire because they can't afford to be a professional fighter in the UFC. I mean, you know what I mean? Like that's, if nothing else, first of all, no, if nothing else, like they need to address that, bottom line. But if it were me, I mean, no one could tell Dana anything, and I would never try to tell Dana anything. But hypothetically, if I were in a position to talk to Dana about anything, I'd be like, dude, The optics of that are not good, dude. Straight up. I don't mean any disrespect by that. I'm not trying to press you. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I am just, as an observer, saying the optics of you handing out $500,000 or receiving $500,000 or playing for this much money or whatever, just where it's public, what money is being exchanged frivolously inside casinos, while simultaneously these guys are like, man, listen, dude, after paying out my coaches, paying this, I can't afford to be a UFC fighter anymore. Those optics are not good. It's as simple as that, dude. They're bad optics. Now, the bigger problem is solving the fact that these guys can continue to have this career. Keep playing as much money as you want. It's your fucking money, dude. You earned it. I would just say, it wouldn't be a bad thing to potentially keep cameras off of you and stop exchanging so much money with the Nelk boys on Instagram. You know what I mean? While this is happening.